You're listening to NFT365, the first daily podcast on NFTs with your host, Fanzo.
What's up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of NFT365. You know, there's something beautiful about our, opportunity, not only as early adopters, but really in this idea of like reinventing something that really we've been living, but didn't realize we weren't kind of taking advantage of. And what I mean by that is really digital ownership. And I was having this conversation over the weekend with someone that really just didn't see the light on what NFTs were, why we should care. And one of the things that I kept kind of positioning it was about digital ownership and where digital ownership in this whole world kind of exists. And it's funny because what have we bought online or digitally that didn't have a physical product that we technically owned? And when I positioned that to a group of friends this weekend, they're like, well, a website, I own a website. And I'm like, you own the website, or you pay for a hosting provider and you reserve your domain name for a certain amount of years? And they were like, okay, good point. And then they were like, well, I own, this software. And I'm like, well, is it you don't technically own it because you're paying a subscription service more than likely, because you're going to have to get updates that are, continue to get out there. And they started laughing. I was like, but if we think about it offline, the idea of ownership, I mean, when we buy everything and anything, we own it, right? Everything from what we buy at Target, or what when we purchase a car or we purchase new clothes. But the cross section of this that I think is actually even probably more important to the conversation is, how is what we own digitally valued? And then how do we have the ability to resell it, or to maximize it, or to show it off to the world? And I will say, it's funny, the more that I come up with creative ways to present NFTs, the more light bulbs go off. But what I also find is that there's also more kind of curiosity around certain components of NFTs that maybe we haven't dove as deep in on as maybe we have in other areas. And actually, I'll tell you, one of those areas, as far as kind of diving deep into NFTs or understanding NFTs, is really that resellers market, right? And I like to we did a masterclass today on exchanges and secondary markets. And when we think about, we're buying an NFT, we might hear a lot about, what blockchain are you buying it on, right? Is it a Solana NFT, an Ethereum NFT? And we oftentimes tie that back to, well, it's because of the marketplace has all of the attention right now, which is OpenSea for the most part. But funny enough, not everything we buy offline today, are we thinking about it in the sense of what we can resell it for, or what others value it as? And so it got me thinking a little bit in just the nuances, right? I've bought and sold hundreds and hundreds of NFTs, right? And we of course are buying one every single day for a year here with the podcast. But I will tell you, the aspect of everything we buy that is an NFT form has to be valuable in the resale component to be worth it. I actually think is a misstep. I actually think it's a step that we are making in regards to this, where everything does have that finite aspect to it. And what I mean by that is, for me, when I get a great pair of shoes, oftentimes when I realize it's a great pair of shoes, this is just me, I don't know about you guys, I'm a sneakerhead, right? I like to go buy a second pair of them, because if I love them, I want one pair to sit up in my closet that I keep for a long time, and then one pair I'm going to wear the hell out of because they're comfortable as hell and I absolutely love them. I did that recently with my No Bulls. I have the No Bull Project sneakers, and I have a bunch of those pairs, but that's just something that, for me, I think about that. But when that pair of shoes, when they're starting to not be as comfortable, I don't think man, this was a waste of money. More often than not, I'm like, man, I do not want to get rid of them, right? I feel like a little bit of a hoarder. I'm like, man, these are my favorite shoes. I absolutely, I love these shoes. And these are And I kind of like, I don't think about like the resale value per se, right? Versus, there are some pairs of sneakers that I buy that I am thinking about the idea of like, what if I keep these in, a great condition? Could I resell them? But it doesn't factor into everything. And then the other part of this is, I don't know how many people have actually have sold things on eBay or on Craigslist. I remember early days of eBay, right? I sold a lot of things on eBay early on. Actually baseball cards. I sold sports memorabilia. I would actually sell, some of a little bit of the collector stuff that we had. And then I sold a lot of like kind of electronics. Like I'd buy a monitor. After a while, I'd not like the monitor anymore, and I'd sell the monitor. But eventually, like selling of products and service, products online became a little bit more difficult, mainly because there was people that turned that into their full-time job. There was bots and software that was put into place that really would maximize every one of the secondary markets, like on eBay. And then, of course, you had things like Amazon and stuff where you were like, why would I buy this for $14 when for $18 I can get it brand new from Amazon? And one of the interesting caveats that I wanted to kind of position here in the NFT space is, if we're only looking at our ability to resell something, then I believe we are either doing a disservice to the rest of the utility of a project, or we are really setting ourselves up for some sort of failure. Because here's the truth. I've got some really rare NFTs in a couple collections that I have, right? In the top 100, right? So out of 10,000 NFTs, mine is one of the 100 most rare in that collection. And I can't sell them to save my life. And you might be like, Brian, like if they're the most rare, aren't they the ones that like can garner you the most money? But here's the thing. If people aren't paying attention to that project, and even if the people are paying attention to that project, but they only think it's as valuable as kind of the floor or the lower end ones jumping in, there aren't going to be people that are going to pay 15 times the floor price, 20 times the floor price. And I will say, like, in a weird way, it's actually started to shift my my whole take on NFTs that I'm buying, with the idea that I do plan on reselling them. And for most of you, you've listened to my 3x3x3 episode of the podcast where, not only do I think about it from buying 3, but if you can't afford to buy 3, you need to really understand what you're going to do with that utility. But, it was actually something funny that someone, I think I saw it on a tweet, and then I went back and forth with them. Someone said, it might have been Data NFT, who's been on the podcast before. Someone posted on Twitter and just said something like, one of the best things I've ever done is I started to buy NFTs on the floor that I thought were the ugliest ones, rather than earlier on, I bought the ones that I liked the most. Reason being, if you like it the most, your likelihood of holding on to it too long is actually probably, you probably have a higher chance of holding on to it longer. If it's an NFT that you don't love as much, like from an art perspective, the likelihood of you getting rid of it is definitely out there. And I felt that a lot when my wallet got compromised, right? When I went in to save some of my NFTs, you would have thought I would have saved, the most valuable right out of the way. Actually, I did, but not most valuable in dollars, most valuable to me, the ones that meant the most to me. But it's also, kind of taught me something in this space as well, is that like, we talk about different swings in momentum within collections, right? And one of my favorite collections, two of my favorite collections today had interesting spikes. So Psychedelics Anonymous, which most of you know is one of my favorite projects. It's, in my opinion, the best game theory NFT project there is. It is, amazing community in there. But they've been trying to get Gary Vaynerchuk to sit down with Volt, the founder, and JB, one of the holders of one of like the, I'd say, voices inside of PA, has been tweeting at Gary like every day to get Gary to sit down with Volt. And today Gary actually replied, and they went back and forth a little bit. And it was funny because there's a lot of like buzz around that. And of course the floor price shot up a little bit. It kind of shot some energy into the collection. But for like that collection, like I have no intention of selling anytime soon, unless the project all of a sudden loses all of its value. I have no real intention of getting rid of PA, but I kind of loved that like Gary V conversation kind of, shot up people's interest. Well, at the same time, another project that I absolutely love, Cryptochicks, over the weekend they announced they brought on 2 new members of the team. They've also done some announcements in their Discord recently. If you're a Cryptochicks holder, definitely jump over there to the Discord. And I just all of a sudden saw an influx of people talking about it. I saw their floor price was going up as well. And it's really interesting because like those 2 projects, if you asked me on a regular basis or every week or so what their floor price of those projects were, I couldn't even tell you. I wouldn't even, like, sometimes I'm like way off too, where people are like, I thought you loved this project. And I'm like, I do, but paying attention to the floor price has nothing to do with like my love for the project. And because I have no intention of selling it and I only own a couple or one, then the likelihood of me caring about like what people are buying them, selling them for is a lot less. Now, with that being said, part of the other thing that I've been trying to kind of wrap my head around is that we have to start thinking next level for the NFTs that we're holding on to. And what I mean by next level is I'm talking about intellectual property rights. I'm talking about like 3 years from now when all of a sudden we have we want to create a new logo for our new company. All of a sudden we want to like, you know what? I own that NFT of that great piece of art. Well, if you own the IP to it, you can now make it part of your logo and you can expand a whole brand on that. And then I also want to think about it like the idea of like brand nostalgia, brand attachment, because I was actually, I was with my daughters this weekend and unfortunately my Jeep broke down and we had some time sitting in the car. And I was watching my daughters kind of go through their phones looking at YouTube videos. And I was like, why do you like that YouTube video? And they were like, oh, I love this person or that character. And then I was like, what made you click on that video? And my daughter would be like, oh my, like, I love that art. And like, as soon as I saw that picture, I had to click to figure out what it was about. And it got me thinking. There are a lot of people that are 14 to 19 years old right now that we could just say they're kind of born onto the blockchain in many ways, where so much of their life, once they start owning things like a cell phone and they start thinking about college and they start thinking, so much of their lives are going to be integrated with NFTs. We have to really start thinking about this idea of like, where does some of the value that we have, where can we take that beyond just what's available today, right? Because back to where I started this conversation on ownership, right? Like, what does it mean to own something in the digital world? And I think we have to look at it from an ownership perspective. Like I always laugh, like when I've owned houses and I've rented houses. When I own my house, I put shit all over the walls. I paint the walls, but I also, in a weird way, am a lot less careful with the house because I'm like, hey, I own it. If there's a hole in the wall, if I dent something, I'm like, I'll go back and fix it. But if I'm renting something, I oftentimes won't paint the walls. I won't put things in the walls. And I try to take better care of it so that it's, I don't have to do as much maintenance on it when I'm leaving the house. But how weird is it that the rental has me caring about the when I'm leaving, but the ownership of the house doesn't have me caring as much. But I also will put more money into the owner side than I do the rental, right? Like I've done full landscape jobs and a lot of those type of things on the houses that I've owned. Where I've rented, I'm going to pay someone to cut the lawn. That's about it. And I say all of that because one of the things that like dawned on me, like, over, I'd say the last couple months is like, when we think about like a project that has failed or an NFT that we love the art, but all of a sudden, like the community's falling apart. There's not really much value there. What can we do then? Like as an owner of that one piece, what can we do to then transfer like, okay, let's create value or something on top of that, right? And I will say, as I look at this kind of like world, I always like to think about like, how do we tap into our superpowers? And like, what about us is like from a superpowered perspective, really, kind of shifts some of the narrative in the way that we show up, right? I believe right now, many people are recognizing that our vulnerabilities, in many cases, if we can take a vulnerability and turn it into our superpower, it's something that allows us to be unique and stand out from the noise. And in some ways, like I would actually argue that like we need to take a better assessment of like what are all the things we're working on. Like, and this is one that came up to me this weekend. My daughter was like, "Hey, Daddy, like I think we're gonna sell some things over the summer for our Girl Scout troops. Can you help me create like something around it online so we can send it to our family for selling it?" And I was like, of course, like we could create like a graphic on Canva or whatever it may be. But then I thought about it and was like, wait a second, what if I could let her pick one of her favorite NFTs that I own the rights to the property, and I could include that in the marketing or like advertising for like my daughter's Girl Scouts that she wants to sell things, right? Like, and I started to really think about this idea of like, when we think about ownership digitally, what if we stripped away completely the fact that we could resell it? How did that change the way we look at a project? And then on top of that, if we knew we could resell it, but we knew that we could only resell it for 50% less than what we bought it for, would it change the way we look at some of these NFT projects? In some cases, it would change it drastically, because I know a lot of people look at it from a short-term flip and opportunity. Other times, people look at a project because they want a 10x or 100x. They want the next Moonbirds. But then when they don't get it, they're like, oh, okay, I'll lean into the project. I'll figure out what this project's all about. But I also think like there's like a weird nuance that if we took away some of this like external pressure, it would allow us to reimagine, reinvent things in some creative ways. And so I hope we can kind of like wrap our head around that. The other thing I want to kind of throw out is kind of this idea of what, I've been referring to as, Alpha Mondays.
It's time for the Alpha Minute. Alpha is actionable info not known by most people. So lean in and listen close, because Fanzo's about to drop today's Alpha Minute.
All right. So from an Alpha Minute perspective, it's really interesting. Bulls and Apes, a project that we just had on the podcast. I think they're delaying their mint a couple of days because they're trying to make sure that some of the smart contract vulnerabilities that have appeared recently aren't going to be there in their contract. And then, of course, there's a couple other large projects. I know Batman, the movie NFTs are coming out in the very near future. Also very aware of like some other projects that I know people have been waiting for kind of towards the end of April, early May standpoint. But, I think some alpha around, Twitter being the main hub and main host of, NFT conversation publicly. It was kind of discovered, it was shared today. The alpha of today was really that Elon Musk's offer to buy Twitter is more than likely going to be accepted. And I'll say, like, I've loved Twitter since day one. I've been active on Twitter for forever. It's why I have such a large following. I have multiple accounts that I tweet out of. But I also love that like Twitter's always kind of evolved. And I would say they've never been great at marketing their best features, but they've always kind of adapted. We went from 140 characters to 280 characters. We never used to be able to have video. Now we can have 2 minutes and 20 seconds of video. We used to only allow to have one photo. Now we can have up to 4 photos per tweet. But I've also loved it because those that find value in Twitter find it in so many different ways. Right? Some people find it from a sports perspective. That's how I actually first discovered it. Some people find it because their favorite TV show, they can use a hashtag and tweet about the TV show the same as their other people that are watching the show. But I will say, one of the things that I think from an alpha perspective, like let's just say information that isn't like commonly thought of, is that, the integration of the PFP where we can verify our photo on Twitter. One of the things that we also have to recognize in this like kind of space is that not only is the data around Twitter massively valuable, but we also we pretty much are well aware. I mean, it's why Elon is wanting to buy or take over Twitter, is that it is by far the most influential public social network that is out there as far as general influence and movements that existed. And I think one of the things that's going to be very interesting is, with Elon Musk, if he ends up becoming the primary owner of Twitter, who does that bring to the platform? And does it really make people leave from the platform? And then the other piece of it is like, I'm very close with many friends who still work at Twitter today. And like, I wonder how like they stick around, how they kind of, are, what their plans are, moving forward. But I'll tell you the other part of this that like from a kind of an interesting alpha perspective is that keep your eye on the moves that Twitter makes and how it influences LinkedIn. I've been noticing some hires and some things in the LinkedIn Microsoft world because Microsoft owns LinkedIn. And if we think about it from a professional network perspective, and the idea of people think of their business selves being LinkedIn. Don't be caught off guard if we start to see some LinkedIn verification components being integrated inside of dApps and websites around NFTs. Trust me, when you see it, just remember you heard it here first. All right, my friends, until tomorrow, make it a great day. Cheers.